Hello, my name is Gutie rrez. Thank you so much for the invitation to this important event. Let me share my screen with you. Today, I will be talking about some global collaboration projects as examples of a strategy to address certain limitations faced by psychology and other behavioral sciences, particularly in relation to replicability and validity related to studying a limited set of subjects in limited contexts. Comparative strategies have been paramount to the development of knowledge through the history of science, including psychology. In psychology, the term comparative has been used mostly to refer to the study of different species to understand behavioral processes. However, comparative methods are in the core of many areas in psychology, including developmental psychology, cross-cultural psychology, clinical psychology, social psychology, differential psychology, and others. The basic idea is that by comparing individuals, groups, organizations, populations, or species, we are able to identify common processes, mechanisms, and origins for psychological phenomena. Needless to say, the comparative method is common to other areas of knowledge, notably evolutionary science, linguistics, sociology, anthropology, and political science. Yet, despite the logical support for using comparative strategies in our discipline, which would demand not only a systematic approach to observe the same phenomenon in different contexts and groups of individuals, convenience, bias, and overconfidence in the generality of behavioral processes have driven researchers to study a limited number of individuals in a few contexts and assume or even defend the general nature of findings in such limited conditions. In my own area of work, a heated and healthy discussion has recurred over half a century on how truly comparative psychology is. Some of you may remember that Frank Beach published a critical article in 1950 suggesting that the area had become the study of the white rat and the pigeon, and that the incorrect assumption that all behavioral processes, being highly dependent on learning, could be explained by common mechanisms studied in restricted conditions in a few subjects in the lab. I have no doubt that the results of that approach was fruitful in a sense, but because it allowed for extensive and deep understanding of certain processes, but it turned out it missed the extraordinary variability of behavior that we can now recognize. A similar effect has been observed in psychology as a whole, but mostly related to human populations. Just to give you a couple of examples, extraordinary findings by Piaget on cognitive development and by Bowlby and Ainsworth in emotional development were initially assumed to be universal in all their details, and only later found to be descriptions of specific cases with relative levels of generality. When Piaget's ideas on classification and categorization were evaluated in different cultures, differences became apparent. Despite attempts to conclude that children from cultures different from European origin were plainly incapable to reach certain developmental stages, data became so stubborn that theory had to be changed, as is expected in science. Similarly, findings in different cultures on socio-emotional mother-child interactions have shown that assuming a single type of attachment, the B type, as adaptive, and the others as not adaptive, may not be able to account for the quality of socio-emotional interactions even within various populations of the same culture, let alone different cultural settings. You may remember how parenting categories defined as authoritarian, authoritative, permissive, and more recently negligent were seen as more or less associated with children's social academic, and emotional success. Yet, when different social and cultural populations were studied, a more complex landscape appeared, indicating the need for a more ecological understanding of those categories that, although valuable, should not be seen as a standard to understand parent-child relationships around the globe. Given the obsession of psychology with being considered a science capable of universal findings, it may not be surprising how stubborn and slow we have been to accept the limitations of those generalizations and to seek solutions to those limitations. In recent decades, two trends have had an impact on this state of affairs. First, globalization has promoted a discussion on cultural and other sources of variability of human behavior, and with it, the realization that a large part of the literature and knowledge in psychology has centered and produced based on a small population of individuals that has been called the weird population, an ironic acronym that reflects the limitations in representation for our research. Some of you may agree and others disagree with me, but I believe that some of the motivation for this critique is political in nature. That, however, doesn't invalidate its value as a reassessment of what psychology should pursue if it wants to be a universal science. Second, the fast growth of research combined with institutional contingencies defining what constitutes merit in academic careers appears to have created a monster body of research with some phenomena that do not seem to be replicable. This is true of many disciplines, but the behavioral sciences have been especially responsive to doubts in this regard. In psychology, a critique by Daniel Kahneman about a decade ago on the lack of replicability of the social priming phenomena promoted a series of actions to address this issue and created somewhat of a crisis within the area and the social trust in scientific findings. These problems are being addressed in a number of ways, many of which are central to what is called open science. Much of these conferences touches on this problem and their solutions. They include changes in research planning, hypothesis development, testing and communication, publication, data analysis and availability, networking, and others. Many of these strategies are driven by principles of open science, which are likely to clash with individual, institutional, and corporate interests, at least in some cases. I will mention one strategy that refers to the first ideas I presented in this talk: collaboration among many laboratories or groups of research worldwide on specific problems that allow direct comparisons in terms of observation of the specific phenomena or the evaluations of precise hypotheses. I came into contact with one of these projects because some time ago I received an invitation from the Many Birds project, given that my lab work is mostly based on research with an avian species. I will not describe my personal experience with it because it is ongoing, but rather I will explain what it is about, previously related projects, and other relevant ideas. The Many Babies project, the Many Primates project, the Many Dogs project, and the Many Birds project are all committed to open science and in general to best research practice to systematically explore phenomena and test hypotheses in a multi-setting, multi-lab, collaborative fashion. They all follow principles of transparency, collective governance, inclusivity, diversity, ethical research, and respect among collaborators. They include collaborators from many countries worldwide. For example, the Many Babies project includes over 500 collaborators and nearly 250 institutions and close to 50 countries. Not bad. Ultimately, these and other similar projects seek to enhance replicability, provide a platform for testing questions that require large or diverse samples, and even evaluate differences across laboratories or settings. That is always a goal of comparative approaches to scientific research. Most importantly, these projects foster collaboration as never before. It appears that the best strategy for this project has been to address relatively limited problems that have already been explored in more circumscribed contexts. This makes sense. A single laboratory might be able to adopt a more exploratory strategy that might be systematically tested in a multi-setting, multi-lab context, once all methodological and phenomenological aspects have been established to a great degree. Thus, it is important to understand that this wide comparative strategy serves a purpose, but only as part of a research process that includes exploratory work, testing work in very controlled contexts, and so on. Organizations at different levels may support these initiatives by changing requirements for grants to encourage collaborations, facilitating the promotion of these initiatives, incentivizing publications that make use of these strategies, and adopting guiding principles for these projects as aspiring principles for scientific production as a whole. Thank you very much for your attention.